Today we're going to talk about the challenges of importing vehicles into a market, and especially a market like Australia. Not that long ago we had local production where the majority of vehicles, over 80%, were actually made here. But now we have zero local production, and we're going to talk about the challenges that every OEM or vehicle manufacturer and importer faces in bringing products to the Australian market in a merchantable quality state. And that's an important point, because bringing cars in, you need to meet certain customs and biosecurity requirements. So you've got a vehicle that has metal, rubber, plastics, etc. But all these vehicles are manufactured in foreign lands. And especially when you've got a strict biosecurity guideline to follow, you really need to make sure you dot your I's and cross your T's.
So let's jump into it.
With 30 years' experience in auto logistics and state-of-the-art locations in 5 major Australian cities, Precar Fleet Services are a premier all-in-one solutions provider for commercial vehicle fleet operators, leasing companies and original equipment manufacturers. Please visit precar.com.au and click on the link to Fleet Services.
Let's kick off and talk about some of the challenges of bringing cars to Australia. What are the pain points for car manufacturers?
It always sounds easier than it actually is to bring cars into this country. You've got to meet the ADR compliance and homologation requirements to bring the car in. So there's a lot of work that gets done by the product team to get vehicles approved to come into this country. And there's a lot of work involved. But that's the start of it. Then the importing is handed over to the logistics team. And the logistics team has a really tough job, and that is to bring vehicles in the right configuration, at the right time, and in the right state. And we're going to focus today on the right state, because when cars were manufactured in either Broadmeadows or a Adelaide assembly plant, you would assemble the car, paint would be beautiful, you'd load the car onto a truck or a train, you would send it to the local dealer, the dealer would just give it a wash, just give it a nice clean, hand the vehicle over to the customer, and it's in as from the factory condition, which is fantastic. You know, the most you'd have a car travel is maybe from, say, Adelaide to Townsville or from Melbourne to Darwin. These are the sort of the long logistical hauls that would be looked after by the local carriers. And the local carriers did an exceptionally good job in looking after the vehicles in that transit. So we don't have snow, we've got pretty good conditions, but there's still always challenges with a bit of road dust, etc., but nothing that a dealership wash can't fix. But when you bring a car from a foreign land, things get very different, and there's a lot of publicity right now about vehicles being delayed due to biosecurity issues. And we'll talk about 2 of the main ones, and also a third one that most people aren't aware of, which is snow. So let's look at the first one, which is the famous brown marmorated stink bug. And why is it a problem? Well, the stink bug actually, its origins are from Asia, but it's actually spread across the world. So it's across North America and it's across Europe extensively. And by name, it's right, it stinks. So this bug has a defensive mechanism that actually emits an odour when it feels threatened. But not only does it stink, it actually ruins crops. So that's why it's a biosecurity issue. And countries like Australia do not want or do not need to have the stink bug here, populating and then challenging and threatening local flora, and also threatening the agricultural industry by eating the valuable crops that generate so much money for this country and also feed this country. So the stink bug is a real problem, and we don't want the stink bugs out in the general populace, because we know these vehicles, when they're imported, they travel all over the roads, and they very quickly will be in amongst the crops and in amongst the vegetation, causing problems, breeding, and then really causing a challenge for the Australian agribusiness. So what you have to do is you've got to treat the vehicles before they get here. And if they're contaminated, you have to treat them on the wharf before they get off the wharf. And that then causes problems. Problems from a logistics perspective, because there's only so many spots that you can park the vehicles to treat them before you start to take them out of quarantined areas and then start to put the whole country at risk. So the onus is very much on the manufacturer. Now, these are the challenges. Here we think that back in the day, we think that the factories are right next to the ports where the vehicles are shipped from, but they're not. The ports are usually many hundreds of kilometres away from where the actual assembly plant is. The assembly plants are located in cities that have large population bases with skills so that they can build these vehicles at scale and be profitable and efficient. And there's a whole broad range of skills that you need to operate an assembly plant, engineers and a whole raft of skilled tradespeople and also a large workforce that can actually be trained to assemble vehicles. So it's a pretty complex process, but it's that whole transit. So do you transit the vehicle from the factory by rail? Do you transit it by truck? Or do you transit it by canal? These are the ways that vehicles get moved and shipped. If you look at the European plants, very few, if any, are on a sea, anywhere near the sea. And the sea presents another challenge because you've got vehicles that then are stored on wharves waiting for ships to pick them up. And the assumption also is that a car is built, gets immediately put on a truck, immediately sent to the wharf, and immediately loaded onto a boat. That doesn't happen. That's a perfect world scenario. And we know that as sure as God made green apples, that does not happen rarely, right? So here we have a situation where there's all these opportunities for vehicles to be contaminated on that journey, and also for seeds. And that's the other biosecurity challenge, that you've got these assembly plants that are located inside the country, the geographics of the country. They have to transition through farmland or other agricultural land. So you've got other seeds that can contaminate, and where the vehicles are stored in paddocks, winds can blow the seeds through. That then causes problems where the vehicles need to be treated and the seeds eradicated and treated so that they can't germinate here and create other challenging plant life to the local flora and also to our local agriculture.
Because, Mark, what actually also happens is that where they park the cars in some of the fields, the grass will grow up and it'll be seeding. So when they start loading the cars on the trucks or trains or however they're going to load them, the seed gets brushed off into cavities underneath the car or in the wheel hubs or wherever. So this is where some of the seed contamination also happens.
Oh, absolutely. And I suppose we've been lucky, we've been spoiled that we've had vehicles basically produced and get here fairly quickly from the assembly plants. But we know that a lot of vehicles were partially built, waiting for chips, etc. So they would then be parked in large lots, holding yards, waiting for these components. That's where you get the challenge where this contamination can occur, the stink bugs, the seeds, etc. And then there's the third one. The third one, which is something that we here in Australia are totally oblivious to, and that's snow. Snow means salt, because what happens when snow's on the road, the European countries, northern European countries, and also in North America, salt is put on the road to melt the snow. So what happens there is the vehicles are driven onto trucks, and if the vehicles are transported by truck, there's a lot of salt water sprayed as the trucks are driving over the salted roads. That water sprays up onto the cargo in the back of the truck. So you'll have salty water, which just sits on the undercarriage and in the engine bays of these vehicles. And then those vehicles then sit at the wharf waiting for the connecting ship, and then they put on a ship and they get shipped over here for another month in nice humid conditions as they cross over the equator to come down here. And the vehicles land, and lo and behold, you've got some surface rust appearing on any untreated metal. And also, if you've got alloy components, that corrosion etches immediately into it. That corrosion is not harmful to the vehicle. It just looks bad. And psychologically, if you're buying a vehicle that's worth $150,000, $200,000, you don't want to be lifting the hood or having a look underneath and seeing your exhaust system covered in surface rust. It sort of doesn't give you a good feeling that you're getting a brand new car, because we know that rust is the biggest fear for anyone. It's the cancer for cars. But really, it doesn't hurt the car. It just looks unsightly. And these are some of the challenges that the OEMs have to deal with. You have to set up a facility that will treat the vehicles at the port before they get loaded onto vehicles, and also treat them here as well, which is why PDIs like Precar do great jobs in eradicating all that treatment, etc. So it doesn't harm the vehicle. It just means there's extra time taken in preparing the vehicle and making sure it's in the best condition as possible, that it meets the customer's expectations, that it's merchantable quality.
Can we talk about the issues now in Victoria, where there's ships queuing in the harbour to offload, and they're having issues with the decontamination of the cars at the moment?
Yeah, so what happens is that now we've got a situation where there's contamination, where there's been stink bugs, vehicles have been contaminated with seeds. So it's the whammy of both of those key elements has now caused a backlog on the wharf. So with the wharf experiencing this backlog, that means that ships can't unload. Therefore, there are ships that have been bringing vehicles for the last month or 2 months that have manifested full loads to be dropped off here in Melbourne. The Melbourne's wharf's full, so those ships can't unload. So they either park out in the bay or park out in Bass Strait, etc., waiting to come in to unload. That's costing the shipping company a fortune. It's costing the car companies a fortune because they're paying rent for their vehicles sitting on wharf waiting to be processed. And it's costing customers because they don't get their cars when they need them. They're still waiting for them to clear. So these cars they're assembled cars. They just need to be unloaded, treated, and then sent to the dealers for final preparation and delivery. So it's a knock-on effect. Shipping is a dynamic process when it comes to the car companies. Vehicles, say produced in Europe, will sail either through the Suez Canal or down through South Africa, drop off vehicles, pick up stock, and then sail across to Australia. That ship then will unload progressively Perth, Adelaide, perhaps Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, maybe Townsville, and then it'll go north. That will then go north up to the Asian countries, up to either Korea, Japan, or even China to either drop off the remaining inventory or more so pick up inventory to then take it to the next spot. So they may pick up inventory from, say, Japan and then send it straight over to the US. So that means that route is delayed because that boat is held up down here in Victoria. So once you knock out that, it's a domino effect of all the delayed deliveries in all the other markets. And also it means if that ship's going back to pick up another batch to come back here, it can't do that because there's still only ultimately a finite number of ships that can carry all these cars. And when you want the efficiency of the boat always moving and dropping off, if it's stationary, it's costing everybody money and it's just delaying everything. So it means that cars will then build up on the wharf over in Europe. They'll build up in the wharves in the Asian countries and they'll build up on the wharves over in the US if the ships aren't flowing smoothly. That then means that you've got sea spray potential and further contamination or corrosion. So this is how the knock-on effect happens. This is the ballet, if you like, of logistics as vehicles flow in and out of the country and maintaining them in merchantable quality. So the challenge there is a lot of these shipping companies saying, I just need to get these things off. It's not my fault that you've got contaminated vehicles. And there's been a lot of press around that. So what the shipping companies are saying, well, we will just drop these cars in another port. And that then causes another logistics challenge because as a car company, you bring cars into, say, Melbourne because, say, the 1,000 cars you're bringing in, they're going to be distributed to Melbourne or Victorian dealers. If those vehicles are then dropped off in Adelaide, you then need to go to the local transporter to get them to get their trucks redeployed to do long-haul transport from Adelaide to Melbourne. Now, those trucks normally would be doing short haul to deliver quickly those vehicles from the wharf to the dealers and keep the vehicles moving. So when you're doing long hauls, it means that that truck is taking, say, 12 vehicles over a 8 or 9 hour journey versus 12 vehicles over a 2-hour journey. Can you see how this then the knock-on effect, that's further delays things and further adds cost. So somebody has to pay for this. Either the car company will pay for it or the customer will pay for it if they need to speed up their vehicle with a faster delivery. So these are the challenges that we all face when we hear about stink bugs. We think, oh, it's just a bug. That bug causes a world of pain. And we hear they're only seeds. Those seeds are a problem. They're actually self-fulfilling in magnifying their own problem because by delaying the offloading of the first batch actually extends the delay in all the other vehicles coming here and further frustrates the customers that have been waiting so many months or years for their vehicles.
Because I think the other thing, Mark, is if the car company has a look at the situation and says, look, I'm having trouble getting vehicles into Australia, they will take all their prime stock and move it to other markets where they can sell it quickly. Because I know if I move it to our local market, I can get paid in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But if I send it to Australia, there's trouble getting it into port and there's all type of issues. So they just start cancelling production for Australia. So that has a additional knock-on effect of wait time and how long customers have to wait for the vehicles.
Absolutely, John. That's a very good point that you highlight there. Is it's another reason why not to build cars for Australia, because it's such a hassle. Right-hand drive, for one thing, the volumes are low versus left-hand drive that you're making for the rest of Europe or the rest of Asia. So it's a frustrating market to do business with. And that's why it's really the real heroes and the unsung heroes of all the car companies are actually the logistics people who deal with these headaches and the poor sales directors that need to get their targets when the cars are quarantined and held up and they can't get their wholesale or their retail targets. It's actually quite frustrating for everybody. So it's not an easy thing to achieve. The remedies that the car companies have done since obviously local manufacturing ceased is that you start bringing cars in with certain protection. Now, the basic one is the stick-on plastic that is stuck to the bonnets, the hood, the boot, the roof line, etc., to protect the vehicles from fallout, because that's one of the primary problems that you get when you're transporting is industrial fallout. These cars are built in car factories, there's foundries, there's all sorts of stuff going on. You don't want fallout to damage the paint because the paint's still soft because it's new. These are elements that are there to protect the vehicles. We need to be mindful that all the elements that we speak of have their downsides as well. So it's great that protects it, but only protects the surface. It doesn't protect underneath for any of the corrosion from the salt air, etc. Now, John, you mentioned in our previous conversation, back not that long ago, imported cars, whether they be into South Africa or Australia, were actually coated in a wax topically and underneathly. So all that subframe was sprayed with a wax, as was the top, and you needed a kerosene type product to take that wax off to expose the beautifully prepared car. The downside of the wax was you never really got rid of all of it. So if you didn't get it off, it would bake on, and then you'd have an unsightly element of or an area of the car that had this wax that was hardened and not particularly nice looking. And it was sort of made a new car sort of less, it's a little bit tarnished. And also the smell underneath. Wax cars, you never could get the wax off the exhaust, so you burn it off as you drove it, so it stank for weeks. New car smells had a different sort of new car smell back then, so you could just smell the exhaust with the wax burning off it. But wax did prevent a lot of damage in those early days. So the plastic on top, that's what most car manufacturers have moved to as a mainstream. And that plastic's not without its challenges, because the adhesive, after a while, if those cars are stored and not sold, with our 40-degree heat or 45-degree heat out in the compounds, that plastic starts to deteriorate. It hardens, and also the glue starts to harden and solidify as well. And then you end up damaging the paint with that plastic. And if you remove it, then you've got residue, which is a problem too. So these are some of the challenges. The third fix is actually the full car cover with little windows. It's expensive. We actually cover the whole car with like a car cover from top to bottom. And you see the guys driving around, they have to unzip them to get in, to open the door, to then get in and drive the car. But they've got a little window here and one on the side. Downside of that, they're expensive, and B, you compromise with your vision. So if you've got some interesting characters moving them as they're transporting, moving them from point A to point B, there can be damage where they actually bump into things. And ultimately, those car covers have to be removed after a certain amount of time too, because they do decay. And with wind and rain, etc., they'll rub on the paint, which then gives you another problem. So there's no perfect solution for protecting the contamination of the vehicle, the damage to the vehicle, other than selling it fast, which is the best fix. Get it in, get it out, and get it into the customer's hands so they can drive it. But these are the challenges that all car companies face from a logistics perspective. And it's important where you get the PDI suppliers, like the pre-cars of the world, do a fantastic job in catering for each manufacturer's unique process on maintaining the vehicle to maximise the merchantable quality of the vehicles.
And Mark, who does the decontamination? Can you explain that process? What is the process and how does it actually work?
It's a cleaning process where they're chemically treated. And what it is, that's actually done by customs. So that's a biosecurity treatment that's done by government employees. So the wharf is actually the domain of the Australian government and customs and biosecurity. Once the vehicle's processed from one part of the wharf to the other part, which is where the PDI suppliers operate, that's when the cars are actually handed over from customs, and they're allowed to be moved into processing to then go to dealers. So the wharf is actually split into two halves. Not perfectly in half, but there's two sides to it. But ultimately, there's only so much square meterage that's available for biosecurity to store the vehicles and to treat the vehicles. The other challenge is when the stevedores unload the car carriers, where they park the cars. If they park cars that are contaminated next to uncontaminated cars, then the uncontaminated cars have been deemed to be contaminated and need to be treated as well. So then there's a whole process of washing and treating the cars with the biochemical agent to get rid of those contaminants. So it's a real tricky process. One that's not an easy one to fix quickly. It will get done. You'll find that they'll eventually catch up, but it just causes delays. It just causes delays because what we've also had is you've got labour shortages. You've got an oversupply of vehicles that are contaminated more so than normal, and then you've got limited supply of people who are A, employed and B, qualified to use those agents for customs and biosecurity to actually handle those cars in quarantine. The other problem you've got with the car carriers, as far as the ships, is they don't just carry cars; they carry machinery. So you will have agricultural equipment on those same car carriers. You'll have earth-moving equipment on those same car carriers. The car carriers aren't compartmentalised. They're just basically decks full of cars parked very close to each other and other machinery. And what can happen is sometimes the vehicles can break loose and then cause a bit of damage, but in the main, they do a very good job of transporting items. And and there's other challenges also where you get fires on these car carriers, and there's been well-documented instances where there's been fires that have caused problems with car carriers. And I think there's actually a situation where right now in Melbourne Port, there's a ship that has been damaged by an internal fire that is being rectified, and that's why it's actually taking up a berth on the wharf, because they need to fix it and then treat the contamination that fire caused. So they can't actually fix it out at sea, they've got to fix it in the wharf. So that's actually taking up a berthing point, which is sort of holding things up as well. Probably works well because they can't process the cars fast enough anyway. But here's a situation where you've got one berth that's taken up. There are a number of berthing points in Melbourne Port, but it's a fantastic experience if ever you see a car carrier being unloaded. They actually unload them quite quickly. The stevedores are non-stop driving those cars off those boats onto the wharf, parking them up, jumping in a commuter van, getting another lot of cars, and they just flow out very quickly. But they are parked very close together. And there's even a process and a protocol as to how far and what the gaps are between the cars, because the other challenge that you get with the transshipping is stevedores, whether they be here or probably more so in the intermediate points, where you get damage. And this is another problem that the car companies face from a transportation from one country to here is often those cars get transshipped. There'll be a boat, and they'll offload in Singapore, and then they'll transship them and catch another boat to Australia. Or they'll transship, a European brand will transship through Tunisia, offload in the Mediterranean. Another boat will come pick them up and take the Australian cars down via South Africa, pick up some inventory, because South Africa is a net exporter of cars, pick up some inventory, bring it across here. So what you then get is, in Tunisia, it's the sort of stuff that you only read about, you think you can't be serious, but you'll have Saharan sandstorms while your cars are parked out waiting to be transshipped, and your cars will be sandblasted, but it'll be so fine you won't notice it until the cars are here and someone's fitting tint to the car, and you'll see tiny little sandblasting all over the glass. So these are the sort of things that happen that can be quite frustrating, but you're not aware of it because who knows what happens. And the other thing also, you get a lot of damage when people drive cars off and on. And I know one brand I was involved with, we were really trying to struggle why had we had such a high rate of damage versus other countries. And it was a silly thing that when we analysed where the damage points were, is think about how often do you drive, if you're in Australia, how often do you drive a left-hand drive car in a confined space? I'm spoiled, car behind me, that's left-hand drive, I drive that, I can drive it right or left-hand drive, and I'm used to it. But if I'm primarily a left-hand drive driver and I've been told I've got to jump and move 1,000 right-hand drive cars onto a very confined space on a car carrier and then park it perfectly, when normally I open the left-hand door to get out, because you park the car to the right and then you get off out the left and you park your next car to the immediately to the side of that, and you're always opening a door into nothing, because you park the car, get out, park the car, get out, park the car, get out. Well, what we're seeing is that because cars were now right-hand drive being parked in the same confined spot, they're out of sequence as to where they would park, and they'd open doors on other cars. And also, if you're driving a left-hand drive car and you're not really familiar where the right-hand front corner of the car is, you'll damage it. And what we're seeing is we're getting left-hand front damage because the drivers were on the right-hand side, not sure how far forward they need to be, and they would touch something with the left-hand side of the car, or damage the left-hand wheel because they'd run it over a railing. So these are the silly things that happen in transshipping and transport that unfortunately cause problems for all of us, because then our cars get delayed because they've got to be rectified before they get handed over to the customer.
I think one experience we had, there was an oil leak on the carrier, and that was splashing about in the bottom of the boat, and it contaminated all those lower cars. And once those cars came off, we had a lot of struggles with the insurance company, but eventually the cars got written off because it was impossible to decontaminate them from the splashing of the oil onto the underside of the cars. So all this type of contamination can happen all the time.
Oh, absolutely. The logistics guys are the unsung heroes of the auto industry, because really they are what the original car manufacturers were, because they basically get a product and get it here in the best possible condition. And they, in the main, do a terrific job. And they've got to deal with all these curveballs like a stink bug, seeds, and some heavy snow that maybe they use trains traditionally, but then the rail gets shut down, so they've got to use trucks, and then all of a sudden you have a salt issue. And don't think trains aren't without their challenges too. Rail dust is a huge problem with trains, and rail dust can be corrosive because the dust can settle and contaminate the paint, or get underneath and start corroding like the salt can. So there's no silver bullet, and they're all challenges that the logistics guys and all the various organisations do a great job in dealing with. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you've got some value out of the challenges of the logistics and the supply chain. It's a really tough job, and there are a lot of curveballs that just keep coming.
Subscribe to our channel on YouTube, Spotify and iTunes, and we look forward to talking to you again next week.